Well, welcome everyone to our first in a series of the Upswell. We are so delighted to have you with us here today. I am Amanda Owenbring, CEO of the Upcycled Food Association, and today is a really special moment in that it marks our 5th year as an organization. So thank you for joining us to celebrate for this in the first of a weekly series for our next 5 weeks. Really delighted to have some phenomenal panelists joining here today, as well as a global audience that's been introducing themselves in the chat. So if you're just joining us, feel free to drop city, state, or country you're listening in from today. And thanks for being with us. So we're going to go ahead and step into the discussion today. So you are here first in our weekly series of topics ranging the wide world of upcycling. So today we're going to start with that global perspective and invite you to hop on to any of these upcoming conversations in the coming weeks. And special thanks to our series sponsor, UFA member 7 Sundays. Just a quick few housekeeping notes today. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. We'll be sharing this recording with attendees as well as UFA members following the call. You're welcome to be thinking of questions as you listen to our panel discussion today, and please welcome you to submit those into the Q&A feature that you can find in your menu. And the follow-up email will be including speaker information and speaker resources. Brief overview of our discussion, pretty straightforward and simple, so we're excited to get to dive right into it today. So I have the honor and joy of introducing our moderator today, Sue Marshall, who is the founder and CEO of NETZRO, a social benefit corporation. And a little bit about Sue. Sue has spent much of her professional career as an entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of NETZRO. NETZRO provides a food technology platform that includes proprietary technology that safely captures and converts industrial food and beverage byproducts into upcycled food ingredients. Sue has entered NETZRO into numerous entrepreneurial contests, accelerators, and incubators with success. She uses her range of business experience and education to assist other entrepreneurs that desire a focus on socially responsible business models and funding. Sue is also a board member of the newest chapter of the Naturally Network in Minnesota. And I'm so delighted that she is with us here today because Sue is a founding member and emeritus board member of UFA who has been with us on all 5 years of this journey. So Sue, heartfelt gratitude for everything you've done to contribute to this day. And I'll hand it over to you and our wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Amanda. This is a wonderful day. It's so exciting. 5 years ago today, we were in Kitchen Town in San Francisco, a handful of us, and we created this. And so it's a special day for me. Those folks are still my dear friends today, and they're still around in some capacity. And so I'm sure some of you on the here today probably are them. And friends of them. So we have a lot to discuss today. I'm super excited. In 5 years, we have done a lot of great work. Of course, we have the certification, and we'll be talking about that today. And where food comes from is here. Vinod is here today to discuss that. We've done a lot of other work too. So I did want to start a little bit about where 5 years has gone from my lens. Obviously, being in the United States, I've had the honor to work with lots of different companies around the globe in this 5 years to see where the state of upcycling is. And I have these 4 experts with me today, and so they have different lenses, and so you'll get a lot from them as well. For the United States, just a little bit of what I've seen in the United States and how that's different. So each one of our panelists will discuss that too from the country of origin and other countries they are experiencing this work in. But the United States is a couple differences here. Number one is we tend to feed the world. So in the United States, when we go ahead and we do something in food, we feed the world, which is humbling, and it's a big, hairy, audacious goal. But what comes with that is a lot of food waste. So in my experience in 5 years with technology, really one of the main obstacles is literally this food that can be used again at scale, and the challenges that is around that much food. The second thing in the United States is regulatory. These 4 panelists will touch on that today, where they come from as well. We don't have a lot of regulatory pressure yet. It is starting. thanks to all the work too that Amanda and the team is doing at UFA to work on policy work. So we're seeing some strides in this past year. Of course, there's SB 1383 in California, which is going to be regulating food going to landfills, and also regulating that some of that food goes back to human consumption. So for those of you today listening, SB 1383 would be a good place to start in the United States to start reading about what's underneath that regulatory measure. We do have some other wins. The EPA redid their food waste grid and put upcycling at the top with donation of food. So this has been very important for us to get that done. And we've had some things in the Farm Bill as well that UFA has been working on. And then, of course, the federal government has put Too Good to Waste law, I think, in. It's not signed yet. It's supposedly bipartisan. So the whole idea of this is there is pressure coming in the United States on food and where it goes after it's been used the first time. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me go ahead and I'm going to introduce, I'll actually give a little brief description of each one of the panelists' background, and then we'll jump into some questions. But I'll get through their backgrounds first, just to make sure that everybody gets a feel for who's here today. So one of our panelists, Aviaja, Andersen, is the founder and CEO of Agrain by Circular Technology. She is working to change the food system and make it circular and within our planetary boundaries. Aviaja has a commercial and managerial background from L'Oreal, where she was responsible for launching strategic brands and business units within L'Oreal Nordic. She was a member of the international brand committees. She manages diverse teams, driving turnarounds and new business models to double-digit growth and healthy bottom line. She is a board member in the Danish Plant-Based Association and a board member in the Danish Food and Drink Federation. From 2021 to 22, she was a member of that country's Green Advisory Board, so a lot of work there. Corinne is a food and beverage consultant, award-winning author, certified holistic health and nutrition counselor, and educator who has explored ancient food cultures where there is little to no waste and where the emphasis is on healing aspects of simple daily meals. She currently is in Sweden. She worked globally as an advisor in startups in the innovation ecosystem, collaborating with social and environmental impact-driven initiatives. She is committed to working towards cleaner, healthier food systems through culinary education. She makes things taste good. Go, Corinne. Jessica Regan works and concentrates on highly scalable startups using business as a vehicle for social change. She's a lifelong entrepreneur and currently is the CEO of FoodMesh, an award-winning food recovery solution provider that leverages technologies to help a network of over 2,500 organizations, charities, farmers, upcyclers, all of that, throughout Canada to reduce waste to landfill, save costs, and feed more people. She's a thought leader on circular economy, waste recovery, and social impact businesses. Her work with government and the UN is highly respected, and she is an economic development wonk. Love that work. Vinodthan Nayagar possesses a decade of leadership and experience in expanding certifications, with expertise in organic and non-GMO standards. First, he worked as head of the technical division for global testing and certification body, and he currently is the director of the organic division at Where Food Comes From. He's a leader in providing trust in food. He is dedicated to connecting people with the origins of food and how it's produced, emphasizing high-performing teams, positive company culture, best practices, and sustainable client growth. These four individuals are amongst my favorite people in upcycling. We've had great discussions on what is needed going forward in the globe and how that work can be done. So we have the first couple questions here, which is basically about where the country they're coming from, and then the challenges that country faces. So I'm going to go ahead and have Aviaja go first. So the question is, what got you into food upcycling and what is the primary benefit for food upcycling in your country? And then what challenges does your country face currently?
Well, thank you, Sue, and thank you, UFA, for the opportunity to be part of the panel. I'm super honored to be invited. I come from Denmark, and Denmark is a very, very small country, teeny tiny country in Scandinavia. We are only 6 million inhabitants, and we are a farming country. So I will start a little bit in the back end of your question. What is the challenge that we are facing? Well, we have less than 2% wild nature in Denmark. Everything is farmed, and we have a lot of monoculture. We have a lot of dairy, a lot of pig production. So we need to change the food system radically in Denmark, but we have a very strong farming lobby that is not really super happy to do this change. And what we see is that by upcycling side streams, we can actually push forward the change toward a more healthy and more sustainable agriculture and farming culture in our country. So that's what is driving our mission on a daily basis here. Every time the bakery industry or any other food manufacturer for that matter exchanges 1 kilo of normal baking flour with the ingredient that we make out of the spent grains, they can actually relieve 2 square meters of agricultural land. So in a country where we have less than 2% of wild nature and an ambitious and a commitment to the EU of reaching 30%, bold changes need to be done, and I hope that my company can be part of that change.
Wow, thank you so much. And I love touching on a little bit of tracking that data for the impact that you have in just integrating that upcycled grain flour into regular flour. That's amazing. So we'll get into that more here, I'm sure. Let's go with Corinne. Let's stay in the EU area there, coming from Sweden. And she does some work in Germany too, so she can probably talk to that. Go ahead, Corinne. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Kim. There you are. There you are.
I thought you were the mute control over there.
Nope, don't have that control today.
So I've been in Sweden for the last 4 years, and from New York originally. And I've been working alongside a lot of food entrepreneurs or startups, early stage, and also some of ready to scale, but mostly early stage. And one of the things that I do is really try to help them integrate circular business models and be conscious about what they are actually developing as new foods, in really incorporating upcycling into their program, or their food waste program is what I call it, in order to really be part of the solution, because we don't need just more food, we need a better food system. So that's what I've been working on mostly.
Great.
And as regards to Germany, I've been, just the latest project I was involved in was writing a book for the university over there, where, which was a real difference in the way books are written, about catering management, in that this particular book included also a waste management unit, as well as sustainability and such. So the food system is really changing also within the food and beverage environment.
Yeah, I love that, Corinne. I love that work, incorporating that food waste piece at the end of your work. And we'll talk more about that too in the culinary and the food service world, because in catering, like you mentioned, that's also important to have that circular view of that. So there's some through lines coming in both Aviaja and Corinne's comments here. Let's go ahead with Jessica. Let's go over to Canada. Jessica, what's going on in Canada?
All right. Yeah. Good morning here on the West Coast. So what can I say? I mean, we've got a lot of innovators here. I've been in this space now for nearly a decade. As I mentioned, we're a food recovery platform. So basically we're professional surplus food matchmakers. So we try to find the most highest end use for surplus food. And upcycling is an obvious fit. Businesses need viable outlets for their surplus. We have a significantly high amount of food in Canada that's wasted. Over half of the food that's grown and produce is lost or wasted, which is significantly higher. And of course, it has to do with the vast distance we have between our markets, and there's a lot of other reasons for that. But yeah, there's a significant amount of food loss and waste that's occurring, and there's a lot of challenges to overcome, the cost of real estate, labor challenges, market prices, supply. There's a lot of different things that our upcyclers are challenged with, but they're not completely as daunting as they are. They are overcoming them, and there is support. But there's a lot more to do. But I'm really inspired by some of the innovators that we're seeing here in various different provinces too. There's a lot going on, but they all have very similar challenges that they need support on, and so that's where policy and all of that can come in, and which we can go to in a bit. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that we talked about this the other day too, as far as funding too. You know, a lot of these businesses need funding, and if we're looking at a food system, it's not just the one company in that food system or one organization in that food system, it's all of them probably need funding, right, Jessica?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, a lot of startups, of course, need money. It's an added layer of complexity when you're an upcycler. I was talking to one of our rising stars here on the West Coast. They are going after funding, but to get the funding, they need a purchase order from a large company. To get the purchase order, they need a facility. To get the food safety and pass the regulations, there's a lot of bottlenecks along the way. And so we're trying to troubleshoot, okay, how do we remove this layer of the onion? How do we get to the next one? There was also an incubator that happened in Ontario. It was really great. So it was a little incubator for upcyclers to help find funding and help them with their business plan. We need more of that, like little tiny organizations. It's like startup school for businesses. We need more of that for sure. That'll really help inspire more innovators to step up to the plate.
Yeah, that's a great, and I think everyone here on the panel has been helping startups in some way, so we got to keep doing that. So great comment on that. I'm going to move to Vinod, and Vinod, you can answer that question because yours is a little different. You've spent time internationally in different locations, so obviously you've touched on some things in different countries, and you know some challenges. But then I want you to roll into those certifications. So some background here to the audience. The Upcycled Food Association created the Upcycled Food Certification on back of pack. You're seeing there that logo up on your screen here, the UP with the little green leaf. That is on back of pack today, and UFA sold that certification to Where Food Comes From almost a year ago. So Vinod will touch on that. There's been almost a year of working on that. And I know that they've went global with it, which is very important. So really in 5 years, we've come a long way. We have a lot of way to go here that we've been discussing that. But I think the certification is really key to get that out. And in our conversations together, the 6 of, we've been talking about how getting a certification global and everybody on board will help with the consumer and get that education out as to what upcycling actually is. So Vinod, why don't you go ahead, let us know a little bit about, why you got into upcycling, what you see about it, the countries that you've been working on, and some challenges, and then get right into the cert.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks everyone. And thanks for the opportunity. I think some of you might know and some might not know. I'm actually originally from South Africa, and, growing up, food waste, there's in different areas of the country, there's poverty, and you really get a chance to appreciate food. You get a chance, especially when you're growing food. And so my background actually stemmed as a result of how can we have more nutritious food? And that's kind of one of the reasons why I went into agriculture, because I believe that if we can get nutritious food and make sure we're using that full value of the food. And so in keeping, I feel like it can offer a very unique perspective, given that I was, spent most of my adult life in the United States, but also, checking in and seeing how things are going in South Africa. The common thread from what I've heard today from different parts of the world, there's still food waste. There's still some level of food waste. About 33% of waste in South Africa, food gets wasted. But at the same time, there's this level of, people are going hungry and still need food. And so there are initiatives in the last couple of months where they've been, trying to adopt some form of upcycling. And so, taking that perspective, that's one of the reasons why I really got into in food space, because I believe this concept of food is medicine. And so when we take it into the upcycled perspective, I think a lot of people try to think that, upcycling is a second grade or it's a secondhand food. But I wanted to demystify that myth right away, and it's actually just as nutritious. It's about thinking in a very innovative way, and partly working with the Upcycle Food Association and them developing the standard. We have a large network of clients that over the last couple of years have actually saw value in the certification. And part of that value is how can those brands, how can those manufacturers and large ingredient manufacturers, how can they provide and make an impact in the world from the aspect of sustainability? So in the United States, again, there's a lot of similar threads we've seen around the world where at least a third of the food goes to waste. And so these innovative brands have come up with ways of how can we reuse this food rather than going to the compost pile, how can we bring it back in? And that's really what the certification, the core value of the certification is. A lot of these brands are innovative in the way of thinking, oh, let me see how I could save the soybean skins, for example. How can I save leftover fruit, which could then, basically be dehydrated and be, kept as a very nutritious meal. So back to the standard itself. I think the standard offers brands a value in terms of their product. It also demonstrated the brands are going through their process of tracing back where that food would have went to and where it's coming from, and the supply chain that it's coming back into. And so those are some of the aspects that the standard provides, in those different areas. Today, we have companies around the world. We have companies in Europe, so some in the Netherlands, we have some in South America, in the Philippines, as well as we've recently started having conversations with some groups in both Australia and the Netherlands. And a lot of them are actually asking, how can we utilize the standard? How can we bring the standard in rather than creating a new standard, since they already have products that have already been certified with us? And then a lot of what I'm explaining to you is very subjective right now, right? It's our experience, the experience from the Upcycle Food Association, but I wanted to bring in just one element, and that's the objective perspective from what the consumers are saying. And so in the most recent SPINS data, there was at least about a 43% in the upcycled food and beverage industry. And so although I'm speaking about this from a subjective perspective, we actually have this objective data that we can back up to show that the value of the certification is firstly increasing, and the brands are continuing to see a value on their product from a sustainability perspective.
So bringing Vinod that information about the consumer, are you seeing the brands across the world are wanting that consumer information as validating before they pursue the standard?
Yeah, in some cases, in the United States, at least, the brands are very, very much focused on how can I make this impact. In other conversations we've had, one of the core aspects of the discussion is this is what's happening in the United States. We're seeing an influx of consumers saying, I want to see I want to see the quality of make sure that the quality of food that I'm eating is there. I also want to make sure that as an individual, I'm contributing, to a better planet, to a better society where we can reduce food waste. And so what I'm seeing is that some of these brands are asking, and they are actually quite intrigued with seeing the traction that we've created in the United States with the Upcycle Food certification. And also these brands are really asking these questions on, can you perhaps speak on a panel in our country to help educate, right? To provide some education on the value, how did the upcycle standard start, and how did that value actually provides value to the brands. Actually, one more country I left out, we actually got invited to South Korea, whose government is very, very heavily invested in producing an upcycle economy in terms of food. And so that's actually one really good discussion that we're going to be having later in November. And so back to your question, yeah, some of these brands are asking to see, hey, what kind of information do you have in terms of data of consumers asking for it, but also are consumers willing to pay that extra premium? And we don't have exactly we don't have the data that says this is the dollar value they'll pay, for an additional premium on the product. But we do know that many consumers have said that, yes, we will be willing to pay, extra for a product that has a stamp of sustainability. And that's one of the aspects that the Upcycle certification standard offers.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, obviously everybody wants to know, but how much more will they pay? At the end of the day, though, we all need to do this work to get the pricing down so that more brands it can be accessible to more brands. And that's what I'm dedicated to do at NETZRO, is to get that technology out there. There is a lot of technology too. We'll touch on that a little bit as we talk. It's not about not having technology out there. It really is about, as Jessica mentioned, getting the funding to get that technology in place, to get those pricing down on processing. Processing is always going to be something we're going to have to deal with. So we really have to look at it full circle and help everybody along that way. Aviaja, I have a question for you on kind of the next thing on policy and things. You have some interesting board experience looking at different organizations. You had mentioned earlier about some countries having it more of a policy certification versus a commercialized certification. So Vinod is talking about this is a commercialized standard versus a governmental oversee. Can you kind of talk about Europe a little bit and what you see all of us can do to help? Vinod said educate, right? Get on panels. What can we be doing to help other countries realize that they can all be using the upcycled certification right away?
I think it's been a little bit of a secret that it had gone global. We went through the certification a little over a year ago, I think. And at that time, we could only have the certification if our products were for sale in the US and Canada. So if that has changed, I think it's very important communication to bring to market. Because what we really need is one certification on upcycling that is easy to understand, that is clear in what goes behind. And I think the one that UFA has created and that where food comes from is managing now is very, very simple. There's not a lot of strange things that you have to fill in. We're used to having a lot of strange things that you have to document in food, but I think this one is quite clear. And in Europe, when we create certifications and labels and all this, it's always from a regulative point of view. So it's in a way it's limiting the way we can operate. Where I feel in my conversations, commercial conversations with customers, the certificate from Upcycled it's a commercial lever. It makes it easier for me to explain what my product is, that there is a verified supply chain, that I have full transparency, that I fulfill all the requirements. So I think it's a very strong mean for commercializing upcycled products and upcycled ingredients. I have customers from basically all over Europe requesting the certificate because many of our customers are global players. So they have business in the US, they have business in Asia, they have business everywhere. So I think really shout it out loud if it's a globally available certificate. And then generally, I feel we need a common language on upcycling, what it is, because it's still, even though consumer sort of attraction is growing, it's still a little bit of a weird concept to some consumers and some producers, and they don't really see why they should be eating waste, or is it bad, or what is it? So I think really having a common, clear language on upcycling, that we are adding value to a resource all through the process. It's not of a lower value. just as Vinod said. So I think common language, shout it out loud if the certificate is
Wonderful,
global.
wonderful. That being said, I'm going to call in Corinne because she's the author in the room here and the educator. Can you kind of pipe in here how you see it from an education perspective, and then also how to get that word out as fast as possible? Because let's face it, we don't have a lot of time here. We can't just sit around for a few years and figure this out. So what do you think, Corinne, as far as getting that word directly to the people?
Make it delicious. In one word, delicious. You know, that's something that, you know, when it comes to upcycled, you know, food or ugly fruit or agricultural surplus, we're not saying it's delicious. And I have to tell you that in the food industry, whether you're dealing with a chef or you're dealing with consumers who are, you know, self-proclaimed foodies, you know, they want to know that it's delicious. I mean, we're talking about, you know, a lot of different innovation, including cellular meat nowadays, you know, where people are not only looking at plant-based or a lifestyle like being vegan, or, you know, sort of switching from your you know, conventional meat to now lab-grown meat. But you've got to make it delicious because you've got people who don't believe in this stuff. And so one of the ways to really front this is to actually make them try, not even say where it comes from, and just say, hey, what did you think about this? Have a conversation and then give them the backstory. But to front with the backstory can be scary sometimes because it's misunderstood. You know, it's not that upcycled food is waste in the sense that, oh, it's been used once before and now, you know, it's really more that it's the part of something that hasn't yet been used. And so, you know, for example, I don't know, peels, you know, so when I was executive chef in my restaurant, what I would do is I would take all the peels, I would take all, you know, the stem ends of things, of I don't know, any number of vegetables and fruit, and I would cook them down to make a sauce, to make broth, to make something so as not to throw away things and then go out and buy stock on the shelf. You know, so that is part of the education, is that, hey, let's have an upcycled food cooking class. I don't know, you know.
I love that.
And anybody could really, you know, sort of get involved in that. But really the number one thing is to really, you know, make people understand that it is delicious. It's just food. It's food. Let's not, you
Yeah.
know, when you
It's
label
interesting 'cause-
something, it becomes difficult.
Yeah. I think, you know, we're at a stage now where when we say to people, hey, have you heard of upcycling? Instead of going right into it's food byproducts or side streams that would have been wasted, we could just say, and you know, it's delicious. We can say it's delicious first. Because, you know, whether
Exactly.
you're Agrain here, you know, some of these brands that have amazing food, let's face it, it's delicious. I like that, Corinne. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna change my way of viewing that too. Thank you.
Yeah, and with Agrain, I mean, when you're working with that kind of flour, it's like, ooh, it has that nutty flavor,
Yeah,
you know,
wonderful.
to bread or any baked goods, you know. It's
Love
like,
that. Let's bring in Jessica in Canada, because we'll jump kind of, you know, you can kind of chime in too on this policy, or if you see anything interesting in Canada, because I'm curious about that. And then I think we'll jump into technology and what's needed there to innovate to get these things even scaling faster. So is there anything in Canada regulatory?
Regulatory, well, we're working on organic bans across different regions. So there's a couple of regional governments that have organic bans, making it illegal to throw out organics, which is a really great start. We're really slow. We're far behind European countries and, you know, California. We need a bit more stronger leadership, I'd say, and a bit more fortitude, I'd say, in some of our policy making. And there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of, you know, committees and all these things at all levels of government that, you know, I participate in, and there's a lot of conversations. It's just slow moving, you know, and even the upcycler movement, like I said, there's a lot of rising stars, as I would call it. They do have products that taste good, but what we're finding in the studies is that taste is helping elicit the enthusiasm, especially with the conscious buyers, the Gen Z, the millennials, but cost is also really paramount, as we know, right? So something that's really tastes fantastic and there's kind of like that ethical alignment, but if it costs significantly more, then at the end of the day, we find that the consumers are not buying the upcycled products despite the taste, despite the branding, despite the you know, alignment there. And so from a policy perspective, really what we'd like to see here is, we have these things called what's being stewarded. So we have like recycled plastic cans where you have a 5% deposit, and businesses have to pay through that through ERP. What would be really great is if we had the organic stewarded, where these it's almost like a sin tax. So the businesses that are throwing this product out, there's a not a tax. I think that's a very strong, like negatively charged word. But in order to create a circularity fund to fund the innovators, so if people are paying to compost, like waste needs to be more expensive, flat out. Like it should be expensive to throw out our food. It is not. It is significantly cheaper to throw food out than it is to recover. And the economics are out of order. And if we're going to see systematic, operationally viable change, we need to really look at the economic model. And it's not in our favor at this time, but it can be. And there are steps towards that. We're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And then data needs, right? You and I have talked a lot about data and getting data to prove to these people who make the rules and the laws.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about how you see data.
Yeah, I mean, it's something it's coming up in a lot of different conferences and conversations, and it's important. But how do you get to it? How do you get to it so it's not just a 5-year waste audit that like is outdated the moment it's released? And so really one of our key focuses, FoodMesh, is getting daily data. And we actually have a model where we buy the data points from the different service providers. So we're getting high fidelity daily data. And we're starting to work with governments to do a data aggregation, build like a data commons. And this sounds a bit kind of strange, but really what we're trying to do is find the different data streams, all the different apps, the upcyclers, anybody operating in the food recovery space to start to create baselines in the IC&I sector. It's one thing to get residents and this, household waste. That's one thing because it's usually municipalities pick up, and so they're able to get that data. There's a huge blind spot for the IC&I sector, and so really what we're trying to do is shine a light on it, get some baselines, track the progress, and measure it in a way that you can track impact metrics, metric tons removed. That the carbon counting and carbon credits are starting to have a bit more momentum. In order to make that legit and authentic and credible, you need solid baselining and good data tracking. So that's one of the things that we're working on. We've got a couple really exciting projects that we're doing here that are kind of landmark data aggregation work to see what's happening across jurisdictions.
I'm keeping my eyes on you. You know that.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of that work too here in the United States. And what you find is that we haven't been forced to have to do those audits, to your point. We most of the food and beverage manufacturers here, actually, if you ask them how much side stream, they have, they don't know the answer. Well, that's amazing. Now you can back into that by knowing how many inputs they have, right? And you can kind of guesstimate. Yeah. But at the end of the day, until we have that baseline and we make it so it's safe so they don't feel shamed or guilt,
totally. There's an art to it, and change theory. There's the carrot or the stick approach. We work with businesses. We want to make it business, like the strong business case for participating. So we're going to help lower their costs once they understand where their food is going. When they realize their avoidable costs, 41% of the wasted food is avoidable, rescuable. That's thrown out in our supply chain. So once businesses start to get a handle on it, it's usually a nuisance thing that they don't try to look at. But if we can encourage them, show economic benefit, reward them when they're doing stuff good, like there's ways to get there, and we're seeing some really great results. Yeah. And also protecting their identity too. Obviously, if they're going to be sharing and participating, you need to steward that information carefully and anonymize it and de-identify. It's really important.
I'm sure Amanda's taking notes on here. That seems like a whole nother webinar just on data. Yay. Let's get Aviaja in here too a little bit on data, because I know the European, they do a lot more SDG work. The UN is, a lot more prevalent there with what they're tracking for ESG work. Do you see anything that, we can bring to these other countries that you might be doing as a start to help out?
Well, the EU has just launched a new ESG directive for big companies with plus 500 employees, I think it is, and massive turnover. It's called the CSRD. And part of that is that companies have to account for their side streams, and they have to strategize on their side streams. What will they do to minimize side streams? What will they do to bring the usage up the hierarchy, the resource hierarchy, for these side streams? So I think for all the startups working with upcycling, this is a major incentive going forward in sourcing resources, because within the next couple of years, all these companies, they have to have a plan.
Yeah,
so
that's a lot like the SB 1383 in California, I feel like, right? At least having a baseline of making them actually calculate it.
Yeah, the challenge here is that it's part of a massive, massive policy directive, and I think the companies have to collect data on around 1,400 data points. So it's a lot. It's
hard to get your arms around that 1,400 data points.
But it's the big companies. But the thing is, if it's a big retail chain, they will have to ask their suppliers, which could be a company like mine, because we will be there upstream in their LCA. So they will have to ask me the same information. So there will be like a cascading of data collection in the whole European Union in the food industry. And it's controlled through this CSRD directive. But I'm not an expert on CSRD, so I don't want to get into too many details. But I do think that it will bring some extra work, but it will also bring a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's the collaboration that we talked about the other day. And what's needed is to stay together and engaged globally and be sharing this information, because at the end of the day, it's going to come fast. I actually believe that a couple of years from now, we're going to be frantic, because I think these things are going to move through pretty quick. I want to bring in Corinne here. I had an interesting situation this year for the first time ever, where I had large companies, food service companies, ask me about some of this data. Like, is there data? Because they have KPIs, they have goals around ESG, and they really are asking, and they control a lot of food. This is food service, large caterers. And at the end of the day, the push might come from them. And I know Corinne and I have had those conversations. Can you jump in here and let us know what we should be doing in those sectors, food service and catering, to try to help them? Maybe they're the push that we need.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult, because, I mean, for example, even in catering, when you're doing mass catering, you're so-called over catering, because when you're doing a huge event, when you're going to a trade shows, they are making more food than is necessary, because they don't have an exact number of how many attendees will come, how many well, they'll have a number on exhibitors, but they won't know exactly how many people are coming to exhibit within the same team, like a brand, for example. Like, they won't know if when Agrain is exhibiting at a show, how many of their staff members will be there. So there's an overage of food, and they have no way to really make use of it after, so it all gets dumped. There is a company, and that's what I've been sort of trying to look for in this book that I just wrote. That actually can measure the amount of waste that goes on in catering companies, in restaurants, where it's a digital unit, and I'll find the name, and as soon as I do that, I'll write it up. But it's a unit that goes over the trash cans in the commercial kitchens, and what it does is that it scans what is being thrown out, and somehow it's able to actually weigh what's being thrown out, not only what, but how much of it. So that, the entity, the restaurant, the catering company has an idea of how much waste is going out the door, so that they can actually start implementing, a food waste program that works better, where, we're reducing or, diverting waste from the landfill. So it's an interesting thing that's going on, but it's there's no no magic. Yeah, we need to create it, basically. You know, there's still way too much waste in the food systems, in retail outlets. There's way too much waste because, you know, they're basically looking for the perfect fruit. When you're looking at retail, they're, you know, the ugly fruit, so-called, is
That's a
sort of
consumer
being,
behavior change, right?
exactly, you know, people have to make that part of their, you know, shopping consciousness. Like, instead of buying or asking for the perfect fruit or buying into that, you know, maybe request. We want farm fresh. We want you know, we're not necessarily looking for shape, but rather for taste, for one, you know.
It's interesting because I actually told these companies that what they should do is start looking at what they're buying, you know.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so then they turned around and asked me, do you have a handful of upcycled brands that would have enough to actually for me to, you know, to Avia's like bread or flour or something, because these are huge, you know, companies that serve a lot of food.
I mean,
so maybe it's the circular approach. So they've been concentrating on the end and how frustrating the end is. Maybe a collaborative approach on helping support them to source upcycled products
and that's the thing. You just, you know, you just hit it on the nail. It's like collaborating. You know, and we're not working together enough. We're all doing our own things and we're not working together enough. But just last week, I think it was last week or maybe a few days more than that, but I was talking to, you know, a gentleman who happens to be the CEO of this farm initiative in Sweden, where, you know, he gave me some numbers, like, you know, 500 tons of onions being wasted, you know, organic onions going into making biogas, you know, and right, exactly. And then you've got another 500,000 tons of potatoes going like nowhere, you know, and then you've got 1,000 tons of beans going nowhere. And then in Peru, where I was, you know, sort of exploring a project, you know, with pomegranates, tons, like hundreds of tons of pomegranates going to waste. And the interesting part about the pomegranate is that it's not just the arils that actually have nutrients in them. It's also the skin, the pith, like the whole fruit. 100% of the fruit is filled with nutrients. And as it is, we're only eating half of it. The other half is getting dumped. Or now we have, like, because they're ugly fruit, they're basically getting dumped whole. So, and we're talking hundreds of tons of this beautiful fruit. So, you know, we're not there where we have an exact solution. I think we need to, you know, to work together, like in terms of the farms in Peru, for example. You know, there's many farms, they need an association. Let's all the farmers work together. You know, kind of like the wine industry in France, for example, or Italy, or wherever.
Some of those industries are very tight. You're absolutely right. So we should do that. So we've got about 10 minutes here, and the audience can go ahead and put questions in the chat because I'd like to have some questions. So if you have a particular question to any of the panelists, put that in the chat. I have a question for Vinod, and then we'll start looking at the chat. There's a through line here, right? There's collaboration, there's circular food system. A lot of this falls into regen egg, right? Regenerative egg is kind of the thing right now. You kind of circle in those as well. As there's certifications for that. Not that Where Food Comes From does all of that, but they do a lot at Where Food Comes From.
Yeah.
So can you kind of jump in and let us know how you see regenerative agriculture and the connections for upcycling, and maybe there's a way in through there as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you know, regenerative agriculture, there's so many definitions out there, and you know, in terms of being in the industry, I feel like at the end of the day, it's about how can we sequester more carbon. This is a very summarized version, right? Part of it is, firstly, how can we sequester more carbon, which helps you know, with the climate crisis that's taking place right now. And then secondly, as a byproduct of that, having good soil that can sequester carbon automatically provides nutrient dense foods. So there's been some research and some different studies that have been done with good quality of soil and how that good quality of soil can actually provide a higher nutrition and higher value of a product. And so I think about food waste, because when you have quality versus quantity, that's what comes to my mind. Having a higher quality product that has even more vitamins than grown in a conventional conventional space or conventional farm versus a farm that's using regenerative practices. So to me, I think about, okay, how can it help in terms of upcycling? It prevents us growing too much unnecessary food and food that we need as we, as we kind of progress through our lives. And so, when it comes to food waste, 20% of food waste takes place on the farm itself. It takes place on the production system, and about 54% of the food waste, 20% from farming, 54% comes from households, and then food service. So those are the two big areas, that I see. And I think when it comes to regenerative agriculture, where food comes from, we actually do have a program. It's called CARE. It stands for the Community of Agriculturists That Respect the Earth. And so that's our in-house regenerative agriculture program that we've already worked with and introduced with various different types of ranchers and farmers and growers. And so that's the space that we want to be in, because we do feel that both from a certification perspective, so from a CARE perspective, and from an upcycling perspective, that those are two sustainability standards that can really enhance, the quality of the product, but also enhance the quality of the land and the way in which the land produces.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I personally have found that to be the case. In Minnesota, I get to hang with a lot of great farmers, and it is, my family heritage. And, a lot of them really love upcycling, and, which isn't, necessarily intuitive. People, originally said, oh, those farmers aren't going to like you if you're taking those grains and giving them a second life. But actually, that's not the case. They actually want to power it forward because they're so proud and they know what goes into it. So I think bringing that forward makes a lot of sense. Amanda has joined us, so maybe she has a couple questions.
Yeah, we have some great questions rolling in here. And Sue, I'm going to start with one that I think you'll be able to speak to especially. How should food waste be stored between the time it becomes waste and the time it is fully used up? How should a small company or startup be able to use 100 tons before it goes bad?
Oh yeah, that's 100 tons. Yeah, those are the numbers we see. And it's unfortunate in the US, that's what we deal with. But in my world, the whole goal was to stabilize it immediately. So instead of dumpsters or any kind of big, huge totes in the back in manufacturing where this stuff goes, that should actually be processed, safely captured right then and there, right? So if we add shelf life to that, we safely capture that, and then we move it out. We move it out with less water, and it's currently safe for human consumption. That's always what NETZRO has been our goal here. And ultimately that helps the logistics of it, right? We're talking about carbon measurement and footprint, transporting stuff around that's wet. That needs to stop. So that would be my take on it. I know that Jessica, because she had mentioned processing too, processing, and in Canada, it's a big geographic, right? So you're carting things by train, and so maybe you have something to add to, or anybody else here.
Yeah, it's a huge problem actually. So I live here in Vancouver, and I was at a regional committee yesterday. Said that actually the processing is down significantly. A lot of the processing facilities and warehouses are closing up and moving to different provinces. So where the production and where the processing don't match, and the transportation, the cost, like I said, the unit economics just don't really add up here. So there's a lot of different challenges. And then when that food is produced, the agility of upcyclers, because obviously you need, even though it's upcycled, you still need steady supply. And sometimes when the potato is a different breed or it's a different size and it doesn't fit your machines, like, it's having that agility into the systems too is really important to help rescue that food and find better outlets for it. So there's definitely some challenges. Processing is just one of probably a roster of about 12 that I have right here in front of me of the things that people are screaming about, unfortunately, from our upcycler here.
We've got a next great question. A lot of upcycled food products that I've come across are expensive snacks, so they do nothing to help with food security and just contribute to middle-class obesity problems. In terms of food justice, isn't there an argument for using food waste as feed and fertilizer to make food from which everybody could benefit from?
Well, I'll go ahead and give people a scope of some of the things. Now, this is the United States, and some people can pipe in from other countries, but in Kentucky alone, there's 100 billion pounds of spent grain in one state. So if you take a look at that, there is plenty, and this is to the point of food insecurity and food justice. There is enough to feed the world. And this is why, I went into this as a B Corp, but there's people on the panel, we're all in belief of that there is enough. And we just have to look at the processing and the funding and make sure that it's accessible for all. And I'll say there's some big companies too that also agree with that. It's just getting everybody in the room to say what parts of that need to go where. And feeding animals is important. Feeding the soil is important. But there's plenty to go around.
I want to bring in another question here. How do you see academia, specifically food science, and how it can support the success of upcycled food?
Corinne's going to jump in.
Talk about it, make it part of any culinary program. I've taught at various culinary programs in different universities in the States. And one of the things that, that we never talked about in class was, what to do with food waste, so-called waste, but, how to use different things that we generally throw away. And it has to be on the forefront of that conversation now, just making people aware, building that awareness. And especially with food and beverage, where, you have your next generations of chefs opening, restaurants. And, we were touching upon that earlier. And I said to you that I was looking for that company that actually measures the amount of waste that goes into the trash can, scanning what it is and how much of it goes in there. And it's Winnow Solutions, WINNOW solutions.com.
Yeah, we like Winnow, don't we?
So,
Great technology.
so it's, that's one thing that, that the food and beverage industry is really, trying to incorporate in commercial kitchens. But certainly, the education part of it is just to really get this next generation of chefs to really incorporate, food saving solutions in everyday cooking, because the issue right now is with different restaurants that have been around for 10, 20 years, let's say, to incorporate a food waste program into the line is hard, because, every person has his or her own job, and, they have to put out the food at a certain time, they have to serve it. And so to incorporate at that point something that wasn't there in the beginning, means more money, more labor, more this, more that, more scheduling. So, it can be hard in the beginning to switch gears, but it's necessary.
Yeah,
so
great.
I would say
and who
that,
doesn't want to hang out with chefs and bring the culinary to this table? I'm all for that. I think we're at the end of our time here. I did want to say that this was great. Got a lot of great ideas here. I think the collaboration needs to continue. I think there's some opportunity at UFA to bring out some, more educational tools, one of which Too Good to Waste.com is a podcast that we originally started 5 years ago. It needs to be resurrected, but we have a lot of great content, even just from this conversation today and the upcoming webinars that are going to take place. So Amanda, close it up with what's coming up.
Yeah, well, thank you all. What a lovely conversation to kick off our series. And again, if you hopped on the line, just want to give a shout out to our upcoming sessions. So this is the first of 5 great conversations we'll be having in the coming weeks, and want to answer one of our questions that rolled in, upcycling beyond food uses. Join us on November 14th, where we'll be talking about applications for upcycling in the pet industry, in cosmetics, home and personal care. So tune in there, and across our conversations to come. And with special thanks to our UFA member and series sponsors, 7 Sundays, all our lovely moderators and panelists for joining us today. And whether you are a longtime UFA member, a new member, or interested in joining this brilliant, beautiful global community, there is a place for you. So I invite you to come learn more at upcycledfood.org, listen in for this recording and the upcoming recordings of all our sessions to come. Special thanks to our panelists today. Stay well all, and happy 5th birthday, UFA.
Thank you. Happy birthday,
Thank
Yuan Fei.
you.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
Bye. Happy birthday.
Bye-bye. Happy birthday. Bye.